Are schools giving kids COVID-19 vaccines without their parents' consent?
They might send out a consent form and try to get you to sign it for your child. But even if you don't sign it, you should know that sending your child to school that day is implied consent.
Let's fact check this. It's time for the Truther Meter Minute. Hi, it's Kayla with PolitiFact. That video is from the far-right conspiracy-oriented website InfoWars. It cites a World Health Organization document about parental consent for vaccinating kids. That's a real document. It discusses implied consent. That's consent inferred from, say, sending your kids to school on a vaccination day. But the InfoWars video takes that World Health Organization document out of context. For starters, the document is from 2014, long before the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, it isn't meant to serve as binding rules the way the InfoWars video suggests. Instead, it gives countries and states guidelines to consider when developing their own parental consent requirements. The CDC says that in the US, there's no federal requirement for informed consent relating to immunization, but all of the states and Washington, D.C. have rules about parental consent for kids to get vaccinated. Stacy Lee, a public health professor at Johns Hopkins University, told us that states do not use implied consent for vaccinations.
Implied consent is usually used for emergency type situations, well grounded in the U.S. value that we respect life and that if you're unconscious, you would want to live.
States typically require that parents actively consent before their minor children get vaccinated. In New York, for example, parental consent for kids 16 and 17 can be given in person, over the phone, and sometimes in a written statement. For kids 5 through 15, an adult caregiver also should be present at the vaccination. Implied consent is not an option. Most states require active parental consent for kids under 18 to get the COVID-19 vaccine. But a handful of states, plus DC, have variations on that requirement. A few states, like Washington, adopted what's known as the mature minor doctrine. This allows providers to waive parental consent for minors deemed sufficiently mature. Other states, like Alabama, have lower consent ages for vaccination, while Nebraska puts the consent age at 19. In DC, the age of consent for vaccines is 11. There have been rare occasions when states haven't adhered to their own parental consent rules for vaccines. Louisiana requires parental consent for kids under 18 and has a COVID-19 vaccination consent form for parents to sign. But in late October, a Louisiana parent said her 16-year-old son was vaccinated without her consent at his school where there was a mobile vaccination clinic. The clinic operator apologized and told the son's school system that it was investigating the incident. Time for the ruling. The InfoWars video cites a World Health Organization document to argue that US schools are using implied parental consent to vaccinate kids for COVID-19. The 2014 World Health Organization document is guidance, not binding law. Countries, states, and cities make the rules. And in the US, no states use implied consent for vaccinating kids. We rate the video's claim false. Thanks for watching this video. For more fact checks, head to PolitiFact.com or subscribe.